on reforming the United Nations Security Council for an equal and sustainable future. Now, despite decades of diplomatic efforts, conflict continues to ravage our world, causing immense human suffering. Beyond every statistic is a story of families displaced from homes, communities torn apart by violence, and people denied essential services like healthcare and education. These conflicts are often fueled by deep-rooted inequalities and political divisions, leaving the ordinary people to bear the heaviest burden. But today, here in this room, we have a rare opportunity. As part of the UN Summit of the Future, this panel will challenge all of us to ask critical questions, such as how can we reform the United Nations Security Council to better represent the world we live in today? So welcome to this discussion on reforming the UN Security Council for equal and sustainable future. My name is Kwangu Liwewe, and I'm your moderator for this discussion. So we're going to kick off this discussion with opening remarks, and our first speaker is Anne-Marie Slaughter. She is the CEO of New America and member of the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism. Anne, welcome. You may go ahead.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here and to be able to speak to you. I will just start by saying many of us, certainly many of us closer to my generation, feel like we have been in this place on this issue many, many times before. I hope by the end of my remarks I can persuade you that this time has a very substantial chance of being different. So I'm honored to be able to speak to you, and I am speaking to you primarily in my capacity as a member of the High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism. New America is doing work on the politics of people and planet, but here I think we have to start by saying at a time of tremendous global conflict on multiple continents, the Security Council is the highest profile example of failure in the multilateral system. We have seen increasing geopolitical divides play out and then lead to deadlock and inaction. The political frustration about this failure to take meaningful action is growing. You can feel it, and you can feel it among young people who wonder why we talk about having an effective international system. Day in, day out, Gaza, Lebanon, Ukraine, Sudan, and many other conflicts. That has also, though, come at a time when the negotiations on the Pact of the Future were taking place, and has provided, I think, unexpected momentum for Security Council reform. So our High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism adopted 10 principles for effective multilateralism. I will not go through all 10, we'd be here a long time. I will list them. The first was that effective multilateralism is people-centric, representative, transparent, equitable, networked, resourced, critically, mission-focused, flexible, accountable, and future-oriented. Representative, we said that means deriving legitimacy from meaningful representation to a clear role in decision-making for all stakeholders and allowing representative majorities to make and implement decisions in the face of minority opposition to deliver on issues of global concern. That's the framework within which the advisory board recommended a combination of Security Council reform and activation of the General Assembly to do more on peace and security. That combination is very important. I was very encouraged to see the Pact for the Future reflect a very similar push for meaningful change. The Pact has a clear call for a more equitable and representative council. For the first time since the council's expansion in 1965, world leaders will formally recognize the need for urgent reform. Even more important, the pact specifically recognizes the historical injustice against Africa in a leader's document and acknowledges that decisions on the future of the veto will be at the heart of reform. It is a document that sets the stage for Security Council reform based on principles more than specific participants. I think that is very important to recognize that Africa must be represented, that other groups of nations must be represented. Those principles, including the principle of enforcing Article 27.3, that nations shall not make decisions when they are a party to the dispute, is a framework that I think has better hope of moving forward than the deadlock we have had versus more permanent members and specific permanent members and more non-permanent members. It's critical that member states use the momentum post-summit to continue the intergovernmental negotiations, which they commit to do. At the same time, the General Assembly, the Pact for the Future, makes a number of important recommendations around enhanced General Assembly action, setting forth a relationship between the Security Council and the General Assembly that is synergistic more than competitive. And I will just remind you that in the late 1990s, when NATO nations acted in Kosovo without the approval of the Security Council, something that Secretary General Kofi Annan brought out later, the next vote in the Security Council was in East Timor, and China abstained rather than blocking. That synergy between if the Security Council doesn't act, someone else will, preferably the General Assembly, is a very important dynamic. So there's no replacement for Security Council reform, and I would say that without Security Council reform, by 2045, on the 100th anniversary of the United Nations, the prospects are bleak that it will be seen as playing the central role its founders envisioned in 1945. But again, we can take actions in parallel. So if the Security Council can't or will not act in the face of threats to international security, the matter should be placed immediately before the General Assembly. I recommend the newly published handbook. It's a digital handbook on the General Assembly's past practice on peace and security. It's a wonderful resource for teaching and I think as a manual for action. It points to a whole range of actions for a more active General Assembly based on past precedent, and the case studies are in the annexes. And second, the upcoming UN Peacebuilding Architectural Review, the PBAR, could also help position the Peacebuilding Commission as a more effective conflict prevention actor and formalize its relationships with regional organizations and financial institutions. So if we look 12 months into the future, which is one of the questions before us, the PBAR will hopefully offer a clear commitment and path forward for strengthening the Peacebuilding Commission and for linking up the peacebuilding architecture with regional structures. There again, the dynamic, if the Security Council can't act, then a regional organization can, or a regional organization can act pursuant to the General Assembly. That we need a variable geometry architecture, to borrow from the European Union. I said at the outset, many of us have been here before. I remember very clearly in 2004, 2005, where there really did seem a moment that Security Council reform was going to happen. I will remind you that many changes in international law and global governance take decades on decades, but we keep trying and ultimately we get there. This is, again, a moment that feels pregnant with possibility. I hope 12 months from now we will see that possibility realized. The second question is who should drive that process? That is up to all of us, member states and global civil society and everyone who cares about the world's ability to actually meet the global challenges we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much.